Okay, so I wanted to start off with, for the audience that doesn't know much about ConnectFor, could you tell us a bit about it, its initial vision, and how did you all come up with it?
Sure. So basically, Manati and I were in school together. We were a year apart, and both of us studied abroad, as you mentioned in your introduction. We both did the IB curriculum when we were in school, which has a mandatory service requirement. So during that time, we had different experiences with our own kind of volunteering and things. When we returned to India, I was working in the social sector, and Manati was working in consulting. And while I was working in the social sector, I was consistently faced with a challenge where even if you wanted to give a grant to an organization, they had to meet certain parameters in order for them to be eligible for CSR funding, which were like having audited reports or certain financial statements, annual reports, those kinds of things. But the thing is that for a lot of nonprofits, they were stuck in a catch-22 kind of situation where they didn't have the money to either do all of these peripheral things or then their on-ground operations. So at that point in time, it occurred to me that, hey, if we got like really qualified volunteers to do this, then that would save them the effort of spending money on something that they don't know about, but it would still make them eligible for further grants. And so at that time, a lot of our friends had just come back to India as well, just live after studying abroad. And they would reach out to us in terms of being like, hey, do you know somewhere where I can volunteer? I want to do something. So Manati was one of my friends who actually reached out to me. And I shared this idea with her. And luckily, with all her expertise, we were able to then create a model and sort of take it from there. And that's how we came up with the idea. We always imagined it to be like a shadi.com, but for volunteering nonprofits.
Yeah, and I think you could say, sorry for interrupting.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. So we also, I think, just in terms of figuring out how to put it together and stuff like that, we used an approach which was called like the MVP model, which is a minimum viable product model, where you build like something super small, something super inexpensive, and then you just so that it you get a model of what you're trying to build out. So we literally started off with having a Google, form for volunteers who were interested in volunteering and NGOs that had requirements. So we went, to a bunch of NGOs in Bombay, understood what their requirements were, and we like manually matched this out to see if volunteers are actually interested in doing this. And then I think from that very experiment, you get so many learnings in terms of what your stakeholder behaviors are and things like that. So using that model, we kept building on. So we built a very basic website to begin with once we validated the idea of it. And then after a couple of years, almost about after 4 or 5 years of having the website in place, we're now enhancing our technology to make it like more of an interactive tool between volunteers and NGOs. So I think that model and that approach has always sort of worked for us.
Yeah.
And I think you all did a really great job about it with regards to it, because it's fascinating that it's like you said, the shadi.com. You all are playing Cupid for volunteers and NGOs, and the way it already gained a lot of traction in the country. I would say I came across ConnectFor back in 2018. So since then also it has grown tremendously and exponentially. So I think you all are doing a really great job with that. But a counter question which I wanted to ask you all was, since you all started with Google Forms and all that stuff, had there